Hello out there, and welcome back to another episode of My Grocery Adventure. My name is Carly. I am the host of this podcast for people who want to make an impact in the world in whatever way that comes about for them. We are rejoined today for her second episode by Kathy Draeger. Hello, Kathy. Welcome back.
Hi, Carly. Glad to be back.
Yes, we're excited to pick it back up with Kathy's story. Last time we covered childhood, growing up in Minnesota, getting to college, going on to grad school, a job that changed your life with a coin toss. I loved that story. That really stuck out to me. And so as we pick it back up today, uh, we're coming to the end of grad school. And as that was finishing up, did you have a sense of what you wanted to do next, or had that plan been forming, or was there another coin toss moment that decided your fate and sent you on into the next thing? How did that unfold?
So, th it was interesting as I was wrapping up my master's research. I actually had been admitted to graduate school in the soil science department with a full fellowship to get a PhD.
Oh,
Um, but as I was doing my master's research, I was really committed to doing interdisciplinary work. So I was working in the Ecuadorian Andes. I was doing soil microbiology research. But I said, like, this is not enough. If we're going to be like selecting edible bean varieties, we should be working with the anthropologists. We should be working like with communities. We should find out like what good does it do if we breed a kidney bean, but these cultures only eat, black beans.
right.
Then we will have done this work, but the food itself is culturally inappropriate. So, to my mentor advisor's credit, Dr. Peter Graham, he actually brought on an anthropologist. Her name is Char Voigt, and she came to South America as well, and we became best friends, and we're best friends to this day. To your point, Carly, about how you developed such, really close, enduring friendships in grad school,
Yeah.
I would say the same thing
Yeah.
for me. So I was able to do this interdisciplinary work that felt really meaningful. It was about the beans, it was about the soil, but it was about the consumers and the culture and all those different parts of the work.
Hmm.
Um, and so then it was time to hone in more to turn my thesis into a PhD thesis. And my advisor said, okay, all your fun and games with your little interdisciplinary work and, that needs to go. I mean, at that time, so in the early 90s, people just weren't doing interdisciplinary PhDs. It was really unheard of. Like
Hmm.
your PhD was when you just drilled down to a few genes,
Hmm.
like you're working in edible beans, you need to pick like a certain portion of the genome and really drill down. It
Hmm.
wasn't about getting bigger and looking at the world. It was about looking closer. So I ended up quitting with a master's degree and saying, yeah, I mean, in retrospect, having funding that would have supported me all the way through a PhD, is a pretty nice deal. Um, and I just walked away from it with a master's degree. Again, so my undergraduate degree took me 7 years. My master's degree, which most people do in 2.5 years, took me 4 years, also because I was having a lot of fun. And so then I just left. I just left with my master's degree. I got a job at a place called Winrock International that was in Arkansas that did international agricultural development. And so I moved to Pettigene Mountain in Arkansas and worked for Winrock International. At that same time I was finishing grad school, a I met a very interesting man. His name was Mike Jorgensen. And he kind of ticked off all the things I was looking for in someone I'd be kind of attracted to. He was a Carhartt wearing, espresso drinking, newspaper reading
Oh, yeah.
guy that I met in St. Paul. And yeah, I fell in love with this uh farmer. He wasn't farming when I met him. He was working at the university when I met him. So I was in soil science. He was in agronomy department. Um, but he really ticked off a lot of the things that uh, I found attractive. And so then we started dating. I moved to Arkansas, and after a number of months of kind of a long distance relationship, I we relocated to Iowa, and we rented a little farmhouse out in the country outside of Sioux City, Iowa, and we got married on that farm. So that was how life unfolded after my master's degree. So basically, finding myself in I should back up a little bit about probably one of the reasons I was so attracted to him as well is even though I did not grow up on a farm, my grandma Elvina and my grandpa, but I have a lot of memories attached to my grandma Elvina, had a small, I think 80-acre farm in southeastern Minnesota. And I always thought that that looked like such a good life. She had strawberry bed and asparagus patch and chickens and pigs and cows. And, you know, I think it was a completely idealized romantic view of farming, sleeping upstairs in the north bedroom there was no heat up there and you're just stacked with quilts. And, it was just a very, I don't know, just what you picture a small family farm to be. That was what my grandma and grandpa's farm was. And I think that is what made dating someone who had that farm background in him partly
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
alluring to me
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
So Mike and I were in Iowa, and we had a very delightful wedding right on the farm. We hired Hy-Vee grocery store to cater us with a hog roast. At the time, they weren't actually doing hog roast. Like, they came to our farm, roasted a hog,
Wow.
and had our dinner in the machine shed, with blue
Perfect.
tarps that were in the background. It was just a boatload of fun.
Yeah.
Wonderful it was a wonderful wedding. And so since now I was kind of jobless and living in Iowa, I got invited to join a business incubator program that was the city of Sioux City was putting on, and they called it the Deming Business Center. And so I was invited to have office space and set up shop basically in this business center. And I started my first company, which was called Sustainability International. Uh,
Mm.
and I did agricultural research and development and environmental research and development work, and had a pretty interesting portfolio of clients and work that was really, really meaningful. So I
Yeah.
got to go to, I was, as part of what I was doing at that time, I went to India on a World Bank project. I was an environmental reclamation specialist on a project, and so was there for the better part of 3 months. And I got a contract to write a book on the use of biosolids, which is basically sewage sludge, as a soil amendment, and had a bunch of really interesting projects that I worked on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you decide? I mean, it sounded like you just didn't want to be long distance with your honey bunny anymore, but was there more to it as far as leaving Arkansas and moving to Iowa without a job?
No, now that I'm the age I am and have 3 kids, two in college, um, it's kind of amazing to think how I just was so unmotivated. Windrock International offered me a very interesting job. So as the job I was working on was wrapping up, they offered me another full-time position. And I was just like, yeah, that's really nice, but I don't think so, but with no job in hand. I
Yeah.
mean, so like in 2020 hindsight, I'm kind of surprised how adventurous and kind of I guess I wasn't really motivated by security. That's probably it. I wasn't really motivated by security.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, so what was the question again? Made that, how did I make that decision to
Yeah,
just
to
leave?
with
Yeah,
no job and to relocate, and like it just sounded like your priorities were, you know, that this relationship is worth it and
yeah.
there's a future here. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, no, not financial security, but relationship security, kind of.
Yeah,
And so our priorities, they change as we go.
yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that was a part of it. Yeah, it was a part of it. And even while I was in Arkansas too, I put an ad in the Sioux City newspaper. It said like professional couples seek home in country. And that's how we found that farmhouse out in on the edge of Sioux Falls, you know. So yeah, I think I was always interested in, you know, seeing seeing what else life had to offer. And it seemed
yeah,
like a beautiful adventure to move to a farmhouse in
yeah.
the Luss Hills. Have you seen the Luss Hills in Iowa?
Mm-mm.
The Luss Hills that are in that part of the state and that southwestern corner of Iowa, I mean, they're really lovely, beautiful hills that like they're the subject of like Grant Wood's paintings. They're just so beautiful. And so our little farmhouse was right in those hills, and it was very, very lovely.
Oh,
So yeah, no, I think that I was drawn towards that image of life.
yeah, yeah. Well, and then my other question, as you got established and starting that first business, was there like how did you know to start that business, Sustainability International, I think you said.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Was there a specific project that was kind of one of the first that like, oh, that, and then kind of make a company around it, and then other stuff came along, or like how did that part unfold?
Yeah. So that's a really, really good point. So kind of getting back to my, when we talked the first time about always like making your way in the world and, like being able to like not depend on the job, but, have other ways of like earning income for one
Hmm.
thing. But yes, so my husband then was working for a company out of Sioux City called Enviro. And it was a company that used lime kiln dust to stabilize manure and sewage sludge, and which are called biosolids now. They're the solids that come out of the sewage treatment system. And they needed a soil scientist, and they were really good about like they tried to coach me on how to set up a consulting business. They were like, so consultants generally charge between 25 and $75 an hour. What would you like to get paid? And being a naive Minnesotan, I was like, I'll take 25,
Yeah.
They were like really trying to coach me, like, you've got a master's degree in soil science. We need a soil scientist. Like you can ask for, money, but I wasn't very good at it. I mean, it was all learning experience. So they were my first client when I started my business. So it was
Okay.
Mike's company. And I actually, just that same strategy, I said, you have a product that it can reduce climate change because it keeps carbon out of the atmosphere. It could be a soil amendment. We can sequester that carbon in the soil. We should see if we could use what you're producing to like do native prairie restoration, because then you're getting habitat, climate benefits, and you're dealing with something that would otherwise be a waste. So it's like there's a win-win. And
Hmm.
I said, if you hire me, we can go. Minnesota has a program called the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. They fund ideas. I
Hmm.
said, I think we should approach that commission and see if they'd be interested in investing in this. And they were, and they did. And I landed the project. And then I'd written the grant, but then I'd also, with their permission and at their urging, written myself in as the project manager for that project. So that's that, have an idea, find a resource, how is this going to be a win-win?
Yeah.
And then I was hired to manage that project.
Yeah.
So that was my first client um, with my company, Sustainability International.
Yeah. And how long did you do that company? Like how many years worth of projects did you do?
So that company, I ran it for probably about 2.5 years. And then I actually sold it to a environmental engineering firm. So I was approached by a engineering firm, and it was an environmental engineering firm that was looking to have like a green unit. Like they did things like, like environmental engineering, like they would do air quality work, like, checking systems and testing and water quality, but they wanted something a little more, that was, a little more, I'll just say green. They wanted more of a green division. And so they bought my company, Sustainability International, and then hired me to come onto that engineering firm as a quote unquote principal in the company. Um, and that was a really interesting experience going from um, academia to running my own company to being part of an engineering firm. And it's, which is its own culture in and of itself, if you know engineers and
Don't.
engineering firms. Yeah. I mean, it's a very technical, culture. It's not a,
Sure.
yeah. And so I stayed with that engineering firm for, I think, just under a year and a half. And then I started my next company. So I left the engineering firm and started my next company, which is called Environmental Ground, Inc. Um, and so basically ran that company then. And it's still open. I still have that company open, and I still occasionally do consulting work under that umbrella, not, but just as a, you know, an occasional thing. I will do, someone will ask me to help them on something, and I can do it under the umbrella of that S
Hmm.
corporation.
Hmm.
So
And how did that happen then with like choosing to leave the engineering firm? Was
yeah.
there an impetus that, it sounds like it was only a year and a half that you did that. Not that, you can't stay only for a year and a half, but yeah, what happened that there was a better option?
I mean, I think, well, number one, the commute. I was living, so at this point, Mike and I had moved to St. Paul, Minnesota. So we'd moved from Iowa back to Minnesota. And I think the commute from the St. Paul to one of the third ring suburbs was just not my idea of, I did not like commuting.
Yeah.
And it was like 45 minutes each way. So that was not fun for me.
Yeah.
Um, and then also just, I think I was so used to being self-directed too, and just setting my own course and picking my own projects and doing my own priorities, that I don't know that I was a good fit in a larger, bigger, like quite a large company,
Yeah.
So, so it just seemed like kind of a natural to, you know, branch out on my own again. I'd had
Yeah.
good luck and I enjoyed working independently. So, yeah. So yeah, and I got a great office in an old building in downtown St. Paul, and I could ride my bike from my house to my office.
Nice.
And yeah, I really liked historic downtown St. Paul, and had really, it was an interesting run with good clients, and really interesting work.
Yeah.
So
Did you have like kind of like how the first business started where you had your first client? Like, was that already ready to go and that facilitated the timing, or was it another like leap first and the business kind of formed on the way down?
I would say it was leap first, the business formed on the way down. Yeah.
I love
Again,
that you're
and
willing to
and
do
it
that.
worked out just perfectly
Yeah,
fine.
it did.
And so yeah, so I leaped out of the engineering firm, started my own company, got this great office in downtown St. Paul, hired a couple staff because there was enough work for a few of us.
Mhm.
And uh I landed another grant working with the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts. And that was just like I talked about with my master's degree, like really being interested in interdisciplinary work. Like it's not
Mhm.
just enough to say, I'm installing this device, how will it impact water quality? And so I worked with the watershed districts to look at how basically community driven watershed water quality work, how that was impactful in improving water quality. So it was a really big, like 2.5 year, 3 year project to look at how, we've got watershed districts across the state of Minnesota that are charged not only with the quantity of water, but the quality of water that's on the landscape. And
Mhm.
I really focused on is having community-led water quality work, does it really result on the ground improvements in water quality? So that was the question I asked
Mhm.
with that grant proposal, which was
Mhm.
funded by both the McKnight Foundation in the Twin Cities and also the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. They both stepped up to fund that work. Um, and we did a survey, we did field visits to every watershed district. We looked at what they were implementing, and there's 81 of them. So it was like, I mean, it was a
Yeah.
big statewide undertaking. Um, and then at the same time, the University of Minnesota actually instituted the first ever anywhere, I think nationally, it was the first interdisciplinary PhD program, which is what I've been waiting for,
Right.
all my academic life, is because that was how I actually did my own my own brain work, my own academic and scholarly interests were really not doing science in isolation, but doing it in the context of community and society.
Yeah.
And so I applied to that PhD program. I was accepted, and I used all the data that I collected with that LCCMR and McKnight Foundation project to use that as my PhD thesis research. So again, it was kind of it was a win-win-win situation. Um, and so yeah, so then I was able to get my PhD in about, you know, 3 years time. So I'm just going to reiterate the trajectory.
Yeah.
7 years to get my undergraduate degree, 4 years to get my master's degree, 3 years to get my PhD. So I was getting better at this as it went.
Yeah. Efficient.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I figured it out. I was finally
Well,
figured it out.
and if you tack in the part where you were getting paid on the other project to collect the data and like do all the legwork, that sounds like it
Mhm.
just kind of paved the way for you to do your
Yeah,
PhD thesis, like
yeah.
probably closer to regular time, but still,
No,
I like
it
immersion.
was, there was overlap there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was really, yeah. And then I started having babies. So while I'm writing my PhD thesis, um, I had my first daughter, my first child, Alma. And then, yes, so over the next 4.5 years, I had 4 babies. So that was really like, I went from like intense academia and work to like intense, you know, parenthood.
Yeah.
So,
What
so that
what
was
was that
very,
transition like? I mean, talk about night and day difference, I would imagine, but
yeah. So I was really driven. I mean, I don't know, maybe it was the 90s. Maybe we were all insane. Maybe we were all like type A or
uh,
workaholics or whatever, but
uh-huh.
I'm working full time, doing my PhD full time. And my idea was I was pregnant. Like I was going to get everything done. I was going to get my dissertation, I was going to get my preliminary exams done, my written, my orals. I was going to get it all done, before the baby was born, as well as, at the same time, one of my other clients was the University of Minnesota, and we were doing the generic environmental impact statement on animal agriculture for the entire state of Minnesota. I was working with 110 faculty. We wrote a 1,700-page report to the Minnesota legislature on the impact of animal agriculture on our state. And so I'm writing the 1,700-page report. I'm doing my PhD. I'm dissertation, exams. And it was July. And I literally physically went to the state and turned in the 1,700-page report. And then that weekend we went to go visit my folks. And I was like, I'm having this strange feeling like every like 5 minutes. And I was only 6 months pregnant, so I wasn't that far along. And we came back and we went to one of these like birthing classes. And afterwards, I was like, I'm having these strange like feelings, like my stomach is tight, every 4.5 minutes. And they were like, get to the
Mhm.
hospital immediately. And I was in preterm labor. And so then, long story short, they put me on full 100% bed rest. I was only allowed up for 15 minutes a day. I could pick, do you want to eat sitting up or do you want to shower? Like that was your choices in any given day. And
Rough.
and then and I still, I still had all this, I still had a company in downtown St. Paul and projects and PhD. And anytime I even thought about work, I would go back into labor. And so I just had to lay on the couch for 3 months. I couldn't even watch TV. I couldn't, like, my friends would bring me like, oh, here, read People magazine. Like all I could do was just lay on the couch on my left side. 'Cause I was supposed to lay on my left side. Or maybe it was the right. I don't remember. Um, and and the only thing I could do is play Tetris. So I had a Game Boy and I played Tetris for like 3 months on the couch while I was in bed rest. So you asked the transition from going 100 million miles an hour to having children. My my strategy of getting everything done before the baby was born was actually very detrimental to me.
Mm.
You know, luckily my daughter's she's fine. She seems fine. I don't know. She seems pretty
She's
good.
mostly fine.
Yeah, she's mostly fine. Yeah. And so the transition was really like, okay, uh that whole going 1,000 miles an hour and carrying a baby didn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
There's
then I
only,
just
yeah,
sat there for 3 months,
there's
laid there.
only so much the body can
Yes.
can do. Like our capacity is human, aka limited. And
Yeah.
yeah, gosh.
Mhm.
But like going from 1,000 miles an hour to playing Tetris, I gotta think was difficult for your personality type, like that a
Yeah.
achiever kind of like check off
Yeah.
a million things every day, like, and then nothing. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it was, but I had no choice and my brain did kind of shut down, right? Like the fact that I couldn't watch TV. Like I didn't even want to watch a movie. My brain really did kind of shut down. And that was probably just exactly what I needed. And it wasn't, I don't remember those 3 months as being like sitting there going, oh, come on, come on, come on, come on. I was just like, oh, like for hours. And it's probably exactly what my
yeah,
heart and soul and body needed, and my baby needed as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
So,
And so
yeah.
I get you were able to carry her all
Oh,
the
yeah.
way to full term
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
oh,
Happy, healthy, easy baby. I call her name is Alma. I call her my decoy baby because she was so easy. I was like, why do people talk about parenthood being hard? She sleeps for 20 hours a day. When she's awake, she laughs and she eats and she plays and then she
decoy
sleeps.
baby.
Yeah, so she was my decoy baby.
Uh-huh. Because then there was a
Three
different kind of
more.
baby. Yeah.
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 Uh-huh. Yeah.
That wasn't the
And they
same.
were, yeah. So,
Did they come along all like right together or were they kind of spaced out or?
yeah, every other year for, all between when Alma was born and my boys were my last two, they're twins, Jensen Lake. It was 4.5 years. And
Mm.
and I remember when our boys were 10 months old, having twins, I mean, I mean, really on my knees begging for mercy because I was so sleep deprived. Both Mike and I were so sleep deprived, right? Just like, oh, I don't know how we're, gonna get through this. But of course you do. I mean, you hear lots of parents say that. But
Yeah.
going from the first experience with Alma to twins who were either one or the other was awake all night long, you know. So anyway, yeah, so I had my decoy baby and my children are just they're just the joy of our lives.
Oh,
They're just blessings, blessings,
yeah.
blessings, blessings.
So
So
did you go back to work pretty soon after Alma was born? Like get back to your company and your projects and your PhD and like all the things that were unfinished that didn't work
yep.
out to get it done?
So I had received a Bush Leadership Fellowship from the Bush Foundation to do this work on I was actually at that point even looking at the human right to water, like access to water is a human right. And so the Bush Foundation gave me actually like an 18-month fellowship that covered that last part of my dissertation work. And Mike, my husband Mike, and I and Alma actually went to Australia and looked at some water. We went to the World Water Congress in Australia and then also looked at some, strategies for how water's managed in Australia as well. So that was fabulous. So yes, I had that fellowship. As soon as Alma was born, I got back to writing my PhD dissertation, and I schlep her in her little baby, bucket to meetings at the university and stick her under the table and rock her with my foot while I was meeting, with my fellow students and other people. So yeah, went immediately back to work, but the pace was better. While I was on bed rest, my husband basically had to go to downtown St. Paul, give up my lease, close down my office, move everything out, which getting back to the dreams I discussed in our first one, I dreamt about that office for years because I never got to say goodbye to it, right?
Oh,
I had a thriving business. It was a cool office with a big open space and then offices, and it
yeah.
was, historic and lovely. And I never got I was at work one day and then it was gone, without me ever packing anything up or moving anything out because I was on bed rest. I couldn't do it. So he had to do all that work. And
Hmm.
so yeah, so I dreamt about that space for years. Yeah.
It's
Anyway,
amazing, like the human need for closure, you know,
yes.
like a
Mhm.
like a transition process that's anchored in time to
Yeah.
process that this has ended and it's not real anymore. It's not part of your life anymore. And like humans are fascinating in that way that like as good as we can be at change, I you still have to process the change.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. We can be adaptable, but there's ways you can do it better than other
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and to your point, you had no choice. So it
Yep.
was what it
Yeah.
was.
It was what
Making
it
the
was.
best of it.
Exactly.
So you said you still have that business, the
Mhm. Environmental
environmental
ground.
ground. Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Um, and so had kids and finished your PhD and
Yep.
sounds like you were working on some projects kind of like
Yep.
all overlapped there. This would this be like your 30s? Am I
Yep.
tracking on our
Mhm.
timeline? Like
Yep.
mid
I'm in
to
my
late
30s.
30s? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, then what? Like after the PhD was finished, did you
Yeah.
just kind of like settle back into working on your projects for your company, or was there like kind of what came next?
Yep. I was still working on projects with my company. And then when my boys were about a year and a half old, I was offered well, I became an adjunct faculty member in the agronomy department, which was just fabulous. So, and then I was offered this, I applied for and was offered this position that I have now, which is I'm the statewide director of a program called the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships. And so, yeah, so I took that job at the university, and that's the same position I've been in now for, see, my boys are 19, so 17 years. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
must be a really good fit.
It's a really good fit. I mean, I don't know that I could have been this happy in any other place at the university because I work with a group. of social entrepreneurs. Like all the RSDP staff are just really, they're driven by the mission and the values of the work and the way that we do the work. And it's the most supportive, you know, group of colleagues to work
Mhm.
with. It's just absolutely, it's really good work. I mean, we're doing clean energy, sustainable ag and food systems, natural resources, and resilient communities, which is like, I mean, what's not to love about
Yeah.
all those areas?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we only work in greater Minnesota, which is how we define that is outside of the 11 county metro area. Some people call it the 7 county, but we kind of go a little bit wider, call it an 11 county metro area. And so we really work in rural places exclusively.
Yeah.
And that is also an unmet need in our state. So that also really fuels our, I don't know, motivation to keep this work going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so was that did you say RCPC or
RSDP,
RSDP?
Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Was that already formed at the
Yes.
University of Minnesota and had already a tradition of what it was doing, its own mission, and you were hired to run what was already existing there?
Yeah, that's such a good question. That's a really good question. So yes, it was formed by the legislature in 1999,
Mhm.
and then it was doubled. No, it was formed by the Minnesota legislature in 97 and then doubled in 99. And then I came on, um, yes, in towards the end of 2005.
Okay.
So it had already been up and running for a number of years when I stepped in. I was not the first statewide director. I think I was the third statewide director.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And for it only being like 5 or 6 years for you to be the third director, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Must not have been
Yeah.
the greatest fit for the people that came before.
I think
Only
the
doing a
first
couple
one
years.
was promoted. The first statewide director was promoted, and went on to have pretty high ranking positions at other land grant universities.
Gotcha.
And then the next director was only part-time, ran another center and ran this center. And then they decided they really needed someone full-time. So then
Um,
when it transitioned to a full-time position, that's when I stepped in.
and how did
So,
you learn about that position? Do you remember?
well, I had been tracking this because, like my first company was named Sustainability International.
Yeah.
And so the Minnesota legislature passed something about regional sustainable development, which I considered like my thing. So the name was really long. And so I could never remember the name, but I'm like that, that sustainability thing that the
Yeah.
university's doing. So I kind of kept my eye on it all the time. And then when the position opened, there were actually people at the university who contacted me and said, Kathy, you really should look at this. So, other people recognize that I might be a good fit
Yeah.
for that role. And yeah, and I'm really glad that this is my career. This has
Yeah.
been the bulk of my career, and it's been really rewarding. Really, I mean, any given day, it's absolutely fascinating work. So, and I am really, really grateful. It's a great combination of research, not just, I mean, we're part of extension. So it's not just, I mean, outreach is important and education is important, but we call our role in reach. So what we do is we do in reach. We hear what the community wants, the community needs, what are the community innovations, and then we reach into the university to find people who can help communities do what they want to do.
Oh.
And in any given year we have about 125 projects. We hire 45 to 50 graduate students. We work with many dozens of communities and faculty, and we really are citizen driven. Each of there's 5 RSDP regions, and they all have governing boards that are 1/3 faculty and university faculty and staff and 2/3 community members. And they actually vote on which projects we will support. And we have project funding that supports those projects on the ground. And
Mm.
so we'll get in, let's just say, get in 50 ideas, and then we have a process for narrowing that down. And then the boards vote on it, and then we have staff in each region that make sure those projects happen, basically. Let me think. I was just giving an example earlier today of an actual project. I'll just kind of show you the ripple effect. So we had some
Mhm.
farmers in Western Minnesota who developed and built a passive solar greenhouse that basically didn't hardly use any fossil fuel to keep it going in Minnesota winters. And it was a way to produce, basically greens. And then they formed a winter community supported agriculture so people could buy shares of what they were growing in their winter greenhouse, deep winter greenhouse. They were getting so many inquiries about what they were doing and how they were doing it that they approached us and asked if we could help them write a book so that they could get this out there. And so we did. We worked with them, published a book on, I have a whole bunch of them over here on my bookshelf. But basically Northland winter production. And then from there, we brought on the College of Design, and we received funding from, again, the Bush Foundation, as well as a consortium of agriculture lending banks, as well as internal university support. And we drew up blueprints, and those are actually publicly available. If anybody's interested, we have deep winter greenhouse blueprints available at rsdp.umn.edu. You can just go and click the
Yeah.
construction materials, the blueprints for 2 different size greenhouses. We've got like a household size and a farm scale commercial size. So depending on what your needs are. And so then we started doing research. We hooked up with the horticulture department. We experimented with, can you grow strawberries? Can you grow tomatoes? And we work with the College of Design. We're testing right now different insulation that you could use on the glazing, the glass at night. And the Minnesota legislature in 2023 actually allocated funding, and we are currently doing a call for farmers who would like to build a deep winter greenhouse. We have a new design. It's our farm scale. So any farmer who'd like to potentially build one with support from College of Design, my program, the RSDPs, they can put their name in, and we're going to build 5 of these around the state on farm. And then we'll be testing them. We'll be doing research. There are going to be a lot of instruments and, sensors so that we can monitor the heat and, fluctuations, as well as other parameters, so that we can learn, and then we can revise our designs yet again, which is the role of a land grant university, is to do research. So
Mm.
that's just one example of how an idea came from 2 small farmers in Western Minnesota, and now we're helping to define and build out and research and disseminate this production method throughout the state. So that's one project.
And you said like 125 projects a year.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like how many, I know you said you hire like 50 or 60 grad students. How big is the staff overall if you do that many projects?
It's really small. We're a really lean team. Up until now, we've basically had 1 full-time staff people in each of those 5 regions. And they basically work with their boards and their work groups and manage that project portfolio. So they're not going to be the people who are collecting data off of sensors, but they're going to be the people working with a grad student in the engineering department who's collecting the data and writing up, like what's working in this deep winter greenhouse and where we see
Sure.
things. So they basically hold the project between the community and the university. They don't do the project. So it's up until now, it's been 1 full-time person, but we also received some support from the legislature, Minnesota legislature, this last session. And that's allowing us to actually hire an additional person in each region, because our portfolio of projects is really increasing. And so we needed one more person to support the work at the regional level. So
Wow.
now we'll have two full-time people, but then we also have clean energy resource team staff. And we have one full-time person in each region there as well. And they just work with our portfolio of clean energy projects,
Mhm.
which we just approved 45 new projects in that area of work. And, that's a really wide range of projects as well, but all centered on clean energy. So yeah, so it's always it's like I said, it's always changing. And what I've learned is you never have to worry about what's going to be the next big thing. Like you don't have to be like, oh, how do we stay ahead of the curve? All we need to do is just wait to hear what the community has to bring forward.
Mm. So when thinking about these 100 projects that you have every year, like does the money for supporting these projects come from grants that you guys are writing, or is there like a allocated budget from, I mean, I know you said you got support from the legislature, so I'm assuming that something like that works like
Mm-hmm.
they allocate a certain amount of money for a certain number of years kind of thing, but
Yeah. So, luckily the funding that established this program is recurring. And so our core funding is it's recurring support from the Minnesota legislature through a fund called the Agriculture State Special. And then we augment that with grants. So like this work we do with deep winter greenhouses, we've had USDA support. Like I said, we had a consortium of agriculture lending banks that supported us in doing this. The Institute on the Environment at the university supported us in doing this. So we're really good at looking around and finding where else we can get support that
Mhm.
augments our core recurring funding.
Mhm.
So yeah, but yeah, so we've been pretty successful in um once we have the research or the program up and running, just to build in more funding around it, especially like our clean energy resource teams. We do have also recurring state funding to do
Yeah.
that work, as well as other foundations, because you know what's unique about what we do with clean energy is it's really kind of community driven clean energy, so that people can kind of start having more say in what the clean energy transition looks like in their communities. So, yeah,
Meaning
so
what?
meaning what? That means in this case, we have work groups in each of our 5 regions that could be like people from utilities, people who are really interested in community solar gardens, and rural electric co-ops, and other people who are all getting together and talking about like, we really do not have enough EV chargers. Like, what do we need to do to get more EV chargers in our region? Or a rural electric co-op that's like, we need to have an EV charging policy. Like, what are the policies out there that rural electric co-ops can have? Which ideally is you're charging your vehicles at night, when there's less of demand on the electrical load. Um, you know, so that's an example, like
Hmm.
bringing people together so that they can identify what's needed in their area and how they could work together and work with us to make those things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, I feel like most of what we have talked about here on this episode are things that I have like never in my entire life thought about even one time. So like thrown a lot at me that like there's a whole
Wow.
world over there that yeah, it's just awesome. Awesome
Yeah.
work and awesome that like I hear you bringing so many people together and I love what you said about like we don't really have to stay on the leading edge of the curve. Like you just wait and see what the community needs. That reminds me back to Marcy Penner's episode where her and Sarah Green were talking about for Kansas Sampler Foundation, how
Yes.
we don't know what we're going to do until we go out there and we see like what do they need us to do and then then we react from that place of understanding what's going on in
Yeah.
the real time landscape, you know? We don't have to beat our head against the wall to like come up with the next genius thing. It's like kind of listen and see what's being brought to you.
Yes, that
Yeah.
is exactly right. I was really inspired by that Kansas sampler
Yeah.
episode as well. I was thinking, oh, I should figure out a way to do something like that myself. There are site visits going from community to community. It's just such a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they're still chipping away at it. We're
Yeah.
gonna check back in with them when they've made a little bit more progress and see what they've learned so far. But like even just, I think they have maybe 60 or 70 communities done. And already you start to see patterns and trends and things. And they're gonna go to all 600 some plate or unincorporated, what did they call it? Incorporated?
Yeah.
I think
Incorporated.
incorporated towns was like 690 of those in Kansas,
Yeah.
and they're trying to see them all. But
That's fabulous.
it's an undertaking, takes some time. Yeah.
Definitely.
And
Oh,
some
that's such a
love,
great idea. I would
dedication.
love to do that.
Talk about a love letter that you're making. I
Yes.
mean, like a
Yeah.
labor of
Yeah.
love to go and see them
Mhm.
all. Um,
Yeah. Let me just say one thing. So, about 12 years ago, I had a board member who kept saying, Kathy, housing. We got to do something about housing in rural Minnesota, like housing, housing. I'm like, his name was Doug. I'm like, thanks, Doug. We do everything else in the world. We're not going to do housing too. But he's like, I'm telling you, Kathy, housing, housing. So I basically, I mean, not to be rude, but I'm like, oh my gosh, we're doing so much already, clean energy and natural resources and food systems. Like now we're going to tackle housing. So I will tell you that in 2023, 2024, guess what we're doing? Housing, right?
it's
We have a couple net zero housing projects that are going on. So we're working again with the College of Design and looking at what does affordable net zero housing look like? And from it looks like, the work that we've done, it's getting support and it's going to be, there's going to be, buildings built.
yeah,
Housing is going to be built as a result of this work. And it reminds me to be like just take it in.
yeah,
Like noted, Doug. Noted.
right,
Housing.
right.
Yeah. Hmm.
Like it's understandable that it would be overwhelming to your point of like the plate
Yeah.
is full, we have so much, but like, when you keep doing the work and keep kind of getting up to speed with the full plate, and then suddenly your capacity is a little bigger, and then you get a little more funding, and now you have more capacity, and like, yeah,
Mhm.
oh, that that's actually like a place where I think no matter what you're doing, I like to think that the best place to be is with a full pipeline of
Mhm.
like, the Dougs that are like, hey, what about housing? And then somebody else is like, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And like this full pipeline of demand for your services. It
Mhm.
can be overwhelming, but it's also like, there's other needs. And
Oh
people
yeah.
bringing you needs is really the highest form of a compliment, in my opinion, is like, we think you can help. Please, we see you creating results in other places. And like the pipeline just keeps filling up with people who are like, hey, you create results. Can you create
Yeah.
results for housing? Can you, I mean, and I'm sure there will be another thing after
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
But it can be so overwhelming in the moment to be like,
Yeah.
I don't have capacity for this right now.
Yeah.
Like,
And it doesn't, yes. And I just had no vision like,
mhm,
oh, where do you start on housing?
right.
What does this mean? Is this remodel? Is this new building new? Is it like a multifamily? Is it, like what does it even mean?
Yeah.
And so, it's rocking and rolling and there you go.
Great.
Yeah.
Housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Housing. That's just one, just again, one example of just being able to sit back and say, just wait to see what the community tells you
Yeah.
and then listen to them. That's probably
Mhm.
the big lesson is just make sure you're listening.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and yeah, to kind of let it shape itself and
mm,
find that happy medium between you giving it everything you have, like trying and pouring everything that all your ideas and everything else, but then also like some of it, I mean, it has to literally create itself. like the life force of what it is has to come together when it's time. And so likely your housing project, like it's time. The
Yeah.
funding is there, the people who are going to do it, make it happen, they're there. And like
Yeah.
years ago, like for the last decade or whatever, poor Doug, he's been telling you about it. Like it wasn't the right time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So that's still where you are
Yep.
leading this team of awesome people doing awesome projects,
Yeah.
greater Minnesota area.
And then I would say there was probably one other big development that gets us up to date
Yes.
to where we are today, which is when our kids were still little, our boys were 3 then, um, we decided to move our family out onto the front line of rural, revitalization. So we'd been living nice, comfortable in, a nice neighborhood in St. Paul. And we bought my husband's family farm in Big Stone County, Minnesota, which is on the western edge of the state. And so we sold our house and we packed everything up and we moved out to Big Stone County and on a medium-sized farm, which is, you know, interesting in this era anyway, because there's a lot of large farms and more small farms, but ours was about 320 acres. And so then we started doing rotational grazing, grass-fed beef, and organic crops like edible beans, which I was just enchanted with anyway, because of just I have an attachment to beans
Uh-huh.
and you know, barley and some other crops. So we've really used this farm, and I'm sitting on the farm right now. I'm looking out from literally from my office window. I can see out on the prairie, for miles and miles. Really, I can see for miles. And this is our kind of our, I guess, living experiment in both like being part of a rural community and being part of helping make rural communities thriving, good places to live. It was a fabulous place to raise our kids. I'm looking up there, we installed a 10 kW wind turbine that powers our farm. So we really got to put into place, the sustainable food systems, the clean energy, the resilient rural communities, the natural resources. We restored a wetland on our farm as well. So really studying these things and working with communities from a scholarly, academic, in-reach, outreach, university kind of way, but then having this on the ground living laboratory where we could put the things that we were looking at into practice as well. So I
Yeah.
would say that this farm has just been um, really an important part of my life and my family. And, the first time I ever lived on a farm was when I bought a farm with my husband. So
Yeah.
it's just been, I would say that's probably the other important part in my own journey is, is being able to farm with, with my husband. So,
What
and
do
our kids.
Yeah. What do you think, um, what do you think is the main thing or a couple of the main things that that lived experience really drove home for you that if you hadn't had the lived experience to back it up, that you might not have really gotten it the same way?
It's just so many. Like, um, just so many learnings, so much to learn. Like so many just little things, even. Like the reason I care about rural grocery stores is I've been doing local foods forever, like when we lived in St. Paul. And then when I moved out here, I'd go to the grocery store and I'll be quite honest, kind of turn my nose up like that produce, like where's the organic milk? You know, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a small town, 400
Yeah.
people out on in a rural, really remote county out on the prairie.
Yeah.
And And so the first few months I lived here, I would take coolers back to the cities with me and I would stock up with groceries in St. Paul because I was like, I'm not sure I want my family to eat that food in that small town grocery store, you know? And then I just decided like local food. That means being able to get it locally. And
Mm.
I just said, that's it. I'm going to work with this grocer and I'm going to figure out how I get the food I want my family to eat from this store.
Yeah.
And and so that started my love affair with rural grocery stores and getting to know our Main Street grocer, Bonnie Carlson, and then literally like following the wholesale trucks to figure out how this was working. And then I went and met the wholesalers, and then just the lived experience of being part of that rural community and understanding how it works. I would take pictures, I'd write articles for the newspaper, and just really learning about the food supply in a remote and rural place.
Yeah.
Um, it's invaluable. People, I don't think unless you um I don't think people in St. Paul would have any, concept of that. So to this day, we order organic milk. We get organic milk through the grocery store in Clinton, Minnesota. And now Bonnie, our grocer, she's like, I text her when I need another case of milk and she buys it by the case. And uh the commitment is like we have to buy it
Right.
because there's very few other people in town who are going to buy organic milk because
Right.
it's more expensive. Um, And so, so we have a compact with the grocer
Yeah.
to buy those things. And also when we had a larger chicken operation and we had eggs, like I worked with Bonnie, we set up a consignment system to sell our eggs in the grocery store. And there were a lot of like, is it legal? What does it take to be legal? Like working through everything it needs to sell farm eggs in a grocery store. And we did it. Um, and Bonnie was like, really, eggs are like at that time, like 99 cents a dozen. She's like, I don't think people will pay 3.75 a dozen for your eggs. And I'm like, well, let's just put them on the shelf on consignment. If they sell, great. If they don't, I'll take them back home.
Yeah.
Um, and then it got to be to a point where people would call in and say, are you getting the farm eggs today? And they would plan trips to the store around picking up
The
farm fresh
expensive eggs.
eggs, the
Yeah.
expensive eggs.
Yeah.
So, so it was kind of a learning experience all around for all of us.
Yeah. But
So,
you're so
yeah,
right though that like until you have to live and depend on the teeny tiny little grocery store, like it's really hard to understand the limitations that they're facing. Or like, where's the organic milk? It's like, dude, number one, you got to buy a whole case. And if you're the only one that wants that, like that was something that we ran into when we first opened the grocery store in Holton was a lot of people wanting, well, not technically a lot, but like several people wanting like, organic carrots or organic berries or whatever it is. And it's like, it's a 30-pound case. Do you want 30 pounds of organic carrots? And they're like, no, I want 1 pound bag. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a problem then, because I gotta buy 30 pounds and you're the only one that wants these. And so having a small population to sell to, it
yeah,
makes it that much more important that like you buy what the community is going to buy from you.
that's right.
And you don't
Yep,
get too crazy and experimental in, do they want goat cheese? Do they want organic this? Do they want like fancy that? No, they don't. And now you're out the money for the case and nobody bought it from you. So
right.
playing it safe, I mean, the smaller the grocery store, the more it has to be like the staples that you know for a fact. Somebody's going to come in here and take that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And so there was a lot of lessons learned. So, I think it was kale. So there was another customer in town who wanted like organic kale. And so Bonnie was buying it. But when she put it in that open produce case, it would
Hmm.
just wilt. So
Hmm.
she was keeping it in the back, in the closed door
Hmm.
refrigerator, the storage refrigerator in the back. but then no one could see it. It was like a catch-22.
Yeah.
So, so this is how living in a rural place can inform University of Minnesota research. So we were like, what's the problem? She's like, I don't know how you put kale in an open produce case and keep it from wilting in hours.
Yeah.
And so we went and worked with a faculty member in horticulture, and we created a produce handling um, sheet.
Uh-huh.
So every single thing, so they could see, like, this is what you do with garlic, tomatoes, apples, kale, grapes,
Yeah.
like we had it and we laminated it with a magnet that you could put right on your produce case so that you could see, like kale, squirt it, 3 times a day, keep it at this temperature, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So that small town grocers who do not have a produce manager, there's no
Right.
produce manager.
Right.
It's these small stores, there's like literally probably just one full-time employee,
Mm-hmm.
the owner and the
Yeah.
owner's family,
Yeah.
right? And so that is how, like, the lessons were just incredible. And then started doing supply chain, like lessons. Like, there's a farmer in the Red River Valley who grows organic potatoes. What do we need to do to get his organic potatoes into the grocery store in Clinton, Minnesota?
Mm-hmm.
And so I personally had to order, I think I ordered either 200 or 250 pounds of potatoes in order, right? Because just like you said, you need to order a case. So you're going
Yeah.
to a specific farm that actually sells their potatoes wholesale and retail. And I wanted that farmer's organic potatoes in the grocery store and then map where they went. They went from the farm to Minneapolis to Wadena, Minnesota, and then on a truck to Clinton, Minnesota. But they got there and I got those potatoes. But I could start to map what is happening with the supply chain and how we get those towns were not that far apart. The potatoes were grown here and I
Yeah.
wanted them sold here, but
Yeah.
they had to go to Minneapolis and then back up to within a few miles of the farm and then down because that's what the supply chain truck routes looked like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Anyway, so there was experimentation that has really led to a lot of interesting research and how we
Yeah.
understand supply chains and how this can work both for farmers, grocers, and consumers as well. But I will tell you, as a result of that, my daughter, she like calls it the winter of potatoes because then my family had 200, 250 pounds of potatoes to eat. So we were like eating potatoes
The winter of
all the time.
potatoes.
It was potatoes all the time, 3 meals a day. It
Yeah.
was potatoes.
Yeah.
So now my daughter was like, yeah, I am not eating. She to this day, she's like, yeah, no more potatoes. I can't
Yeah.
eat potatoes.
I'm good.
I'm
Thanks.
good. I had
Yeah.
a lifetime that one winter that mom did that one
Right.
experiment and brought in all
Mom's
those potatoes.
experiment. Oh my gosh.
So yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
Oh,
No.
this has been so fun to get to
Yes.
hear about your amazing work and the way that your life continues to inform these ideas that you have about what the community actually needs and what the real situation is that's even unfolding out there.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if a lot of people are like that, where they're doing research at the university level and living it so personally. I feel like almost always there's kind of a fence around academia where it's very much just like intellectualized. And so the
Mhm.
fact that you do have such a hands-on lived experience of what it is that you're working on, I feel
Mhm.
like it's got to add a lot of credibility to, again, the results, the solutions, the outcomes that you're able to generate because you see the need
Mhm.
firsthand, up close yourself.
Yeah. Yep. And my staff who all live and work in their regions and well and are
Yeah.
really embedded in part of those communities so that they also just have that lived experience, which
Yeah.
is one of the beauties of extension. I mean, University of Minnesota Extension has hundreds of employees, more than half of who live in greater Minnesota,
Yeah.
right? And who are based in greater Minnesota and work in greater Minnesota.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that is the beauty of extension as well.
Yeah. Never really thought about that, but you are absolutely right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Kathy, thank you so much for taking
Thank you,
time
Carly.
to do
Yeah,
these
it's
episodes.
been
I have
fun. Been
really
fun.
enjoyed getting to learn more about your story
Yeah,
and
thank you.
where your passion comes from for this making an impact that has already taken many forms in your life, as we got to hear about, and it doesn't sound like you're done anytime soon. I mean,
Not for the foreseeable future. So
yeah.
we'll
We
see
did
what the
talk
next chapter
about a
holds.
little bit, I guess, and maybe we could come back on another one at some point and do a little bit about like your sabbatical that you just did and some writing that you're doing kind of behind the scenes and some other
Mhm.
things that are maybe cooking more personally for you apart from like your role
Yeah.
at the university. But um yeah, I mean, it seems like you still have a lot of road ahead of you, and I'm super excited to see like what does life continue to bring you as far as
Yeah.
how to help make an impact.
Likewise. So we'll
Yeah.
just stay tuned. We'll stay tuned
Yes,
and see,
very good.
see what the next chapter holds. So
Exactly, right?
yeah.
Oh, well, thanks everybody for listening. Really appreciate it. Take a second, like the video, give it a thumbs up, leave your comments down below, say hi to Kathy, ask her a question if you have one. Let us know. Did you learn anything in her episodes? I know I did. Like I said, I feel like we talked about a lot of things that I like never even think about. And honestly, it gives me so much peace, relief, satisfaction to know that not only are there a whole team of people working on these things, but that they're people like you, that they're people who are showing up and caring and driven by the mission, driven by the values, like you said about your whole team. They care about making it better. And you gotta love when there's like a whole pocket of that happening that you didn't even know about.
Yeah.
So thank
Good
you for
stuff.
illuminating
Yeah.
it for us. It is.
You bet,
Awesome.
Carly.
All
Thank you.
right. Yeah, thank you. Bye,
Right.
everybody.